Welcome to the Cruise Lifestyle.
So thanks once again, Bruce, for calling in.
My pleasure.
And
great to be here.
Yeah, it's a few stories, I guess, that have happened over the last week since we last caught up. So we'll go through some of those and have a bit of a chat.
Yeah, fantastic.
Awesome. So just going to the high end of the scale, former Crystal CEO is now sort of, if you can say it's moved up in the world and now CEO of the world.
Yeah, I don't know that you'd actually express it that way, but a guy called Tom Walber, and I don't think that it had been really made clear that he was no longer at Crystal Cruises. Crystal's had a fairly torrid time through the pandemic. Our parent company, Genting Hong Kong, very much hit very hard, and there's been lots of sort of fairly public complaints about slow refunds, etc., which they assure me they're all on top of. But anyway, through all of that, Tom took over from a lady called Edie Rodriguez, who's very flamboyant and vivacious, high energy New Yorker. So a bit of a different style. Brought a bit of a different style to the job. But anyway, yes, he's now moved on to the World, which is this residential ship. Don't quote me, but I believe that at least one Australian female billionaire owns a cabin on the World, which basically just cruises around the globe. I think every year the residents, who probably, I don't know that a lot of them actually live on it all year round, but some certainly do. They do a vote on the itinerary, where they want to go this year, and it's a fascinating model. Been around for a while. Been to Australia many times. Not so recently, I don't think, but
no, it was actually here last year when the pandemic started.
Okay.
Because I was actually looking after it in Sydney doing the ground sort of stuff for it,
right.
And I think it was right at the time when the pandemic was sort of hitting. They'd left Sydney. They were making their way around to Western Australia, and they were going, I think, up through across to Africa or India or something like that. But
right.
It sort of all was coming to a head with the pandemic at that stage. So they have been here.
Right.
I think they're looking maybe in a couple of years' time coming back. But wonderful crew and owners. You can't call them guests.
No, right. Okay.
They're owners and residents. But lovely people to work with.
Right.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
So,
yeah.
We're sort of in the process. The leaders have just sort of broken up from their little Glasgow climate change, but Royal Caribbean have put their hat in the ring and said we're going net zero.
Yes, absolutely. And look, I think that 2050 is far enough away that just about anyone can say this is an aspirational target, and particularly given the approach of some of the leaders saying that it's all going to be led by technology, which is definitely going to be the only answer. But anyway, good to see Royal Caribbean putting its corporate social responsibility hat on, and definitely prioritising this target. Now, look, the cynic in me says that there's been a lot of marketing studies recently that say that if you want to appeal to the new generation of anything in any business, you need to tick these environmental boxes. But they definitely are doing that, and they've talked about having a carbon neutral ship launching by 2030, and that's not that far off. And certainly, there's still lots of debate about what could make that happen. And I think optimism that hydrogen technology could improve and be sufficient that you would enable cruise ships to operate using hydrogen. It's just such a massive global issue because, even if you develop an engine that can run on it and, run on it safely, etc., you've got to work out how to refuel them, all that sort of thing. But anyway, fantastic to see Royal, cruising to that carbon neutral goal by 2050.
Well, I think, last, 18 months to 2 years, really. I mean, I think most of the major cruise lines have put in efforts around that.
Absolutely, and Clear as well. They've all set quite ambitious benchmarks. Clear, I think it was quite clever. They had an aspiration. I think it was to halve emissions across the fleet, but it was based on a benchmark from maybe 2000, anyway, from a few years ago when things were really stinky. And so, they definitely, they've set a realistic benchmark, and it's really good, that at least this is on the agenda. And, certainly anything that can improve efficiency, look, it might even make fares cheaper if you can make ships, run on less fuel or cleaner fuel, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, they've said they're going to do stuff, but they've actually put their money where their mouth is, and actually, the plastic straws,
absolutely,
the cutlery, the washing, all that sort of thing. They've really sort of done that. So it's good to see. And I think in a lot of ways the industry is probably sort of going ahead of a lot of other industries in terms of actually.
Absolutely, and certainly ahead of merchant marine shipping and all that, any sort of cargo shipping, passenger shipping is streets ahead. When you look at the age of some of those cargo ships that are floating around, they're pretty dirty old things.
Not at all. Aurora, they've got some special offers. They're heading to Antarctica. They're looking at January next year, and they're putting some aggressive things in the marketplace to.
Definitely. Look, so poor old Aurora, like everyone, they've had a pretty tough time through the pandemic. They've got obviously the Greg Mortimer, which had only, I think it had a little bit of sailing before the pandemic onset, and was definitely tied up in, with cases in those early days. Of course, that's long behind us, but they've basically been unable to operate. They had great plans to get going locally, but unfortunately that didn't eventuate. Anyway, finally they've decided they're going to try and get a Antarctic season away in January. It's cruising out of Punta Arenas in Chile, and I guess because it's a relatively short lead time, yes, there's some amazing deals on offer, and an incredible experience. Aussies can now fly out of Australia. You don't need permission anymore, being for the last 2 days, and so there's no reason that Aussies can't get on this on these departures. So see your travel agent now. Do we have?
I'm not sure. I have to look up on the airline thing. Have we got flights there as yet to South America?
No, nothing scheduled, and so it would probably have to be through the US. But you can that's definitely quite achievable. There's flights to Los Angeles, and then from there, obviously, good connections into South America, and opportunity to see LA for a day or two on the way, perhaps. But yes, unfortunately, the long haul across the Pacific to South America isn't operating yet, I believe.
Yeah, not directly at least.
Yeah.
Cunard have announced some new cruises, some new itineraries for Queen Elizabeth next year. They're sort of ramping that up. Yeah,
we're ramping it up, and that's certainly how they've pitched it. It's actually a redeployment, and it's involved the cancellation of their Japan season. So Queen Elizabeth, had always been destined actually to cruise in Australia, and then to move to Japan. Unfortunately, just still too much uncertainty about ports and deployments, and so they've stuck with a sort of safer option of the Med, and then I think the Caribbean. And it's a shame, but look, the bottom line is, yes, there's demand everywhere, and of course the cruise ships have got to deploy their vessels, cruise lines have got to deploy their vessels where they're going to get a yield. Japan, it's too uncertain, unfortunately.
Well, Japan's, I think, one of the other few ones that haven't quite opened.
Correct. That's right. And look, they're hoping for it, but of course, as I think we had planned to also talk about, in the middle of it all, there's been this underwater volcano erupting in Japan, so there's all this pumice floating around, which is going to impede shipping a little bit. Look, it's nothing serious, but yes, they're just. I'm not surprised that they've moved away from that season, but look, it's a fantastic destination to experience on a cruise, and obviously got a big home market as well. So let's hope that Japan can get up and running very soon in terms of cruising. Let's
talk about Australia.
Yeah.
No progress since last week in terms of cruise. We're still sitting and waiting, and
look, I just feel like it's got to be any moment now. I monitor the legislation, and what's happened is that they've basically modified all the legislation to allow for outbound travel, outbound flights, but nothing to do with cruise. Dan Tehan did promise, but he has promised before, that discussions would at least commence when we're at 80%, and I think we're getting pretty close there, Australia-wide. Dominic Perrottet has assured us that it's on ScoMo's agenda. Anyway, but it was interesting to see Royal Caribbean had their quarterly financial update this week, and not unsurprisingly but disappointingly, they've kind of given up on the Australian market. Obviously, they don't have a year-round deployment here, and they had not long before that confirmed that they wouldn't be putting ships down here over the upcoming summer season. So, yet again, more Australian businesses and cruisers very disappointed. Yeah. Richard Fain said they're talking about I think they're saying Northern Spring, which would sort of be in the first half of next year, but that's irrelevant to them because they wouldn't have a ship here anyway. So. Yes, they have very little expectations of a recovery. They're definitely still planning, big season here locally, 22-23. But
this year
nothing before
like
then.
Impossible. I mean, you're talking 3 months to get a ship up and running and deployed.
Yeah, and sold.
So, and we're looking February, and their season usually finishes March or April anyway. Correct. So it's not really
correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ponant have been in the news. They've had their ship up in the North Pole, but they had a bit of an emergency exercise.
Yeah. Look, this would have been, man, what fun. Simulating a polar environment rescue, and yes, just really what a great experience for everyone involved. So they sort of had to simulate, and what I love to say, it's an international rescue. Just like Thunderbirds, they coordinated this rescue effort, and it was while their new ship, Le Commandant Charcot, made her one of her trial voyages. They took her to the North Pole, so very, very far north. And yes, I just would have loved to see Thunderbird 2 landing on the ice and pulling those people out. It wasn't quite that dramatic, but really, really fascinating. To see what you would need to do to survive and to undertake a rescue event, rescue activity, in that sort of.
It would have been. I'll presume there's probably been some videos on board. I'm probably sure we'll see something about
absolutely.
That, it's amazing. A lot of people don't realise the amount of safety protocols and safety drills and all that sort of thing that ships.
Absolutely. I was lucky enough to do a Hurtigruten voyage to the very far north a couple of years ago, and even doing an excursion on the ice. It's the safety protocols are so it's so careful. Even just from the point of view of safety from polar bears, you never want to disturb a polar bear because it's a very harsh environment, and if you spook them, you might frighten them away from a source of food. So you don't see them close up at all, and if you see them in the distance, you sort of hang back, from the ship and just watch them on an ice floe through binoculars. But nevertheless, any shore excursion, you see all of the expedition leaders and crew, they're all carrying rifles, because safety is such an important thing, everything, and it's a very harsh environment. You don't want anyone falling in the water, you don't want any, and you don't want the environment also to be, damaged in any way by, human intervention.
Bit of a quirky story. Well, I think it's quirky. The Brisbane Lord Mayor wants to clean up the river.
That's right. This is certainly, an aspirational target. I mean, you often find this with, state or local political leaders. These aspirational targets. Having control over nothing much that they can, they can actually control. But this is to turn the Brisbane River, which is a bit of a sort of a muddy colour. He wants to turn it bluey green again, clean it up. which I don't know that it's naturally dirty anyway. It's kind of, it's
like
sedimentation. Exactly.
Yeah, like the Yarra in Melbourne.
Yeah.
I mean,
how do you blue? So
you put like a few sort of tons of breath or something on the.
Yeah, that's right. A bit of a flocculant that you use for your pools, or get all the dirt to go to the bottom and then vacuum it up. Perhaps
it's a good word, isn't it? Flocculant.
Yeah. Yes. Anyway, I mean, yes, nice idea.
Is it possible?
I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah. Yes. You could say the same thing in Bordeaux in France. An amazing river system. The water's very brown. It's very muddy. That's kind of that's nature.
That's kind of a river, though, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, exactly. That's right. It's bringing sediment, along with it.
Speaking about Europe, Unique Cruises. We had a chat with Walter Nand a few weeks ago, but they've teamed up with a wholesaler, Keith Prowse.
Yeah, Keith Prowse. Yeah.
And I know Walter is a very dedicated World Cup rugby sort of person, so they're actually putting some packages together with.
Okay. One of which I assume he'll have to escort.
I think he's got that team.
Got to take one for the team. Yes, this is Keith Prowse, who sort of sports and entertainment ticketing specialists. So they get access to these ticket and accommodation packages for events like the World Cup, and a really good collaboration. Obviously, die-hard Aussies might fly to Europe for a couple of days to see some matches, but most of us would go as part of an extended holiday. And so, of course, what better pretext to go for an event like that, but also be able to enjoy barge cruising, or some of the offers that the products that Walter sells through Unique Cruises. Really good option. And of course, France, because the way that the World Cup operates, it's played in grounds right across the country, and so lots of opportunities to see the countryside and experience some of those great rivers.
Yeah, absolutely. And the barge cruising, I mean, they're such small ships. It's an ideal sort of situation where you can get a small group of people together, hire it out. You've got the tickets, and wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great way to do it. Aqua Expeditions.
Yeah,
they've got a super yacht. It's cruising the Galapagos.
Yes. Look, it's pretty much a below deck model. I think it's only 8 cabins, and it's a new ship called Aqua Mare. But what's interesting about it is that this is a very upmarket brand. Cut its teeth in cruising on the Amazon, and they've got a couple of ships there. And then, amazingly, it's an American guy, but he sort of had this aspiration to launch Amazon cruises because it's such an amazing waterway. And he did a trip to Southeast Asia, and he saw the Mekong, and so he's developed a ship for the Mekong, and now same model for the Galapagos. Because the ships are very luxurious, very beautifully put together and custom built for each destination, and so they have a kind of dedicated clientele, but also quite a big charter business. So people like Scenic, APT, ANK, various brands that people would be familiar with, I believe, have chartered these ships as part of their overall packages. Yep. And so this, I think, gives him yet another string to his bow in terms of people who like the product, like the style, to experience another destination. Of course, the Galapagos, what an amazing place to be able to visit. Incredible.
Yeah, and sensational product and sensational destination, really, isn't it? It's just
absolutely
just a great combination.
Owned by Ecuador, and very heavily regulated, and so again, there's big barriers to entry, but for and very limited in terms of passenger numbers, and there's sort of mandated you have to have a government-sponsored guide on each departure. You have quite a strict timetable of which island you can call out when, to make sure that the places don't get overloaded. It's been very well managed from that point of view, and so a great coup, and an amazing way to see it. In this, really is like being on a little super yacht. With a dedicated crew looking after every whim of those on board.
And it'd certainly be a bucket list, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Like, really. Just
absolutely.
need the dollars. Lindblad, it's probably not a brand that's reasonably well known here. National Geographic, they have a a tie-up there, but they've acquired a former crystal vessel, which was their expedition vessel, I think, wasn't it?
So Lindblad, it should be well known here because they bought Orion Expedition cruises from Serena Bratton, and initially, essentially, I think in the end that they acquired the business to acquire the ship, and which was very well known to Australian cruisers, but they haven't actually been operating locally for some time. They've got representation here through Adventure World, but this is quite interesting news. The Lindblad family, in fact, Jeremy Lindblad, one of the sons, came and ran the business here for a while, but then eventually they closed the local office and appointed a local representative instead through Adventure World. But yes, they've done their financial update this week, and very interestingly, not in any of the documentation, but during the investor call, the sort of the Q&A that they do afterwards, confirmed that they were the people who bought Crystal Esprit, which our viewers would know was the kind of ultra luxury yacht operated by Crystal Cruises. Interestingly, had an interesting past as part of the Star Cruises fleet, which used to be called Superstar Taurus. They tend to name their ships after the various signs of the zodiac. So Superstar Taurus was the sort of the base of it, but underwent a major refurbishment to become part of Crystal when Genting Hong Kong, which also owns, we were talking about before, owns Crystal and Star Cruises and Dream Cruises. So it became part of Crystal, and was offering. I think they launched the Seychelles, very boutique, small ship offering. But through the pandemic, they did a couple of financing transactions, I think. And anyway, it has emerged that Lindblad has acquired it, and I think for $13 million US, which seems very low price to me compared to what the figures that Crystal were talking about, what they spent on it. I could be wrong. And Lindblad's essentially going to deploy it again in the Galapagos to replace a ship that they're phasing out there.
And they've apparently had record sales.
Yes, and look, I think a lot of the high-end expedition cruise lines, they're obviously talking it up, but anything that is aspirational, like the Galapagos, Antarctica, these bucket list trips, people haven't been sailing, cruising during the pandemic. They've definitely been saving, and now that there's a little bit of certainty, they seem to be booking those things, in droves. So yes,
well, it has been the high-end stuff that's made the headlines with record sales. I mean, we were talking before about
World Cruises,
Viking, and yeah,
and I saw this week Royal Caribbean's recently released Ultimate World Cruise. I think they're saying it's 70% sold already, and the top cabin. That's more than $1 million, the fare, and they've sold that through a travel agent in America. So, yes, quite fascinating.
Yes. Wouldn't you love to get the commission?
It's the biggest commission check. That Royal put out a statement saying it's the biggest commission check they've ever written on a single book.
And that's the whole round world journey.
Yeah, 274 days, 9 months in a royal suite. So it's the top suite.
Wow.
And yes, good to see that's been sold through a travel agent.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's
incredible.
Amazing. We spoke last week. It's just incredible itinerary, that one.
Absolutely,
incredibly long round world journey.
Yeah.
Just getting back to Dream Cruises, they've tightened their health and safety. Yeah. And now requiring mandatory vaccinations where they weren't necessarily before.
Correct, and this is on World Dream, which is has been sailing out of Singapore through the pandemic. Look, I think it kind of reflects that there's enough of the Singapore population vaccinated now that they can make it mandatory. Mind you, pre-vaccination, they were still operating and doing it very, very safely.
Well, they were one of the first ones to get up and running, really.
Correct. Yeah, they and Royal have both been, with the great cooperation of the Singapore government compared to the Australian government with cruise lines here, they came up with a collaboration, a model that would work, and it's been very successful. I don't think there's been certainly been no outbreaks on board. There may have been a case or two, but nothing that spread. All the protocols worked beautifully, and they've tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of guests. Anyway, but in this latest development, yes, now they are mandating, I guess, as even an extra layer of safety, they are now requiring vaccination for passengers over 12, I think, because such a large proportion of the local population has been vaccinated. And again, it probably provides yet another incentive for the ones who aren't vaccinated yet to get the jab.
Yeah, because I know Singapore's sort of had a few little sort of ups and downs with cases and things like that. But
absolutely, and look, I think this is going to be the case everywhere. I hate to say it, but in the end, we're all going to get COVID. It's just that for those of us who are vaccinated, it's fairly minor in the vast majority of cases. And so it's really good that some Australian governments are now focusing on hospitalisations rather than case numbers.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's certainly been an interesting journey, that's for sure.
I'll say.
Thank you once again for coming along. It's always good to catch up and have a chat just about the many and varied things that are going on through the world of cruising and associated tourism and things like that. So,
absolutely.
No
worries. Well, hopefully next time we'll have something more positive to report about the local market.
How many times have we been saying that? But
I know.
One day we'll get there.
One day it'll be right.
Absolutely. All right, well, thanks, Bruce, once again for coming along, and we look forward to catching up next week.
Good on you. Thanks, mate.
All right.
Cheers.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.